Miter joints are one of the simplest joints around, yet at the same time one of the most difficult to cut. Why is that? Well, it's because of the amount of precision that's required. Even being off a fraction of a degree is enough to leave a gap. And when you figure going all the way around a frame, doing 4 miter joints, the problem gets multiplied because every fraction you're off gets added up going around. You end up with at least one corner that really looks bad. Now, a lot of times we fill that with sawdust, and that works pretty well, but it's a whole lot better if we don't have as much to fill. So how do you get a clean miter joint? Well, to understand that, we got to start with where the problem's coming from. And the problem's coming from that every time you make a miter joint, you've got to do a setup. Actually, you've got to do 2, because if you think about it, you're cutting from 2 different angles. So you've got to do the setup from one angle and then the setup from the other angle. If we could get away from the setups, we can improve the quality of our miter joints. And that requires some sort of a fixture. And the fixture I recommend is using a miter sled on a table saw. Now, I've used miter saws, and I've got a radial arm saw sitting back here, and I've done good frames, good miter joints on both. But the setup is your real difficulty. And even with indents, you know, that set that 45 degrees, sometimes you don't get it. So you put your runners, you put your table, your base for your sled, and you make sure that the base of the sled is perpendicular to your blade. How do you do that? You use a square, speed square or a tri-square, run your blade up and make sure this is perpendicular to the blade, okay? It really doesn't matter if the table itself is, it matters if this is. Then the next thing you want to do is you want to put your known good 90-degree piece of wood, mount it here, and you want to make sure it is 45 degrees to this. How do you do that? Again, you use a square. Now the tri-square is not going to work for that. Actually, what I used was a drafting triangle. I set that up against the fence here that I know is perpendicular to the blade, and I mount my board here so it's 45 degrees to that. Now you can do the exact same thing with a speed square, okay? Put the speed square and then do the same thing. The only reason I use the drafting triangle is it's a little bigger. So now with that made and all attached together, I can use it to cut my pieces, okay? But here's what I want to show you. Here's the trick to making sure it works every time, even if your sled's not perfect. First, I'm going to cut one piece. So I cut this piece on this side, which means it's this side of my corner, okay? Now I take the other piece and cut it on the other side. You always want to make sure you cut them on opposite sides. Now when I bring those together, I know I've got a perfect 90 degrees because this is perfect 90 degrees, what I'm referencing off of. And we can check that out by putting our square in here. And there we've got it, okay? Now, you're not sure that works? Okay. Here's a frame I made using this miter sled. This is out of oak. It's 22.5 inches by 28.5 inches. All 4 of my corners are tight. Why? I did it on the sled. One of the really cool things about this type of sled is that even if everything's a little off, as long as I'm cutting one piece from this side and one piece from this side, and this is 90 degrees, that'll always end up being 90 degrees.